To all of you who have joined us, welcome to this last MIE seminar of the 2021-22 academic year. So it's for anybody who is not at the moment kind of near the university or tuned into what's going on. It's we've actually got a couple of weeks left in April. Students will be starting to write their exams tomorrow. And it's been a pretty successful term for U of T engineering. We managed to get through almost the entire academic year in person. We went online from about mid-December through the end of January or so, just to stay away from Omicron. But otherwise, I think it's been a great year, and I think we're looking forward to an even better summer, and then hopefully next academic year, next fall and beyond is. We start to approach a real normal again. We'll see. Anyways, it's a pleasure and a privilege to introduce our speaker today. So Professor Susan McCahan is, well, she's well known at the University of Toronto, but I think it's really important to recognize that she is a professor first and foremost in our Department of Mechanical and Industrial Engineering. So not everyone may know that Susan didn't start out as an expert in engineering education. She came to us as a thermodynamicist many years ago, and her research interests moved on. But nevertheless, Susan is a master teacher, has won a number of big prizes for her teaching, including the President's Teaching Award here at the university. That was in, I think, 2007. It was just the second year that had been awarded. And later on, I think, won a 3M National Teaching Award for her work with, I think, with the ESP course in first year, if I'm not mistaken. And then, a long time ago, Susan started to get into administrative work, both within the department, then at the faculty level, and a few years ago was lured to Simcoe Hall, to the senior leadership at the university, first as a vice provost of a new portfolio. Merrick Gertler, when he started as president, had identified, I think, 3 pillars that he wanted to focus on, and one of them was to find ways to innovate in the area of undergraduate education. And he brought Susan aboard to focus on that. So she became a vice provost for innovations in undergrad education. And then I think a couple of years after that, the portfolio of academic programs came open, and she took that on as well. And so she's now a dual vice provost, I guess we could say, and has done that for a number of years, and is really well known at the university for thinking very deeply into what makes a good education and what we should be doing at the university to provide our students a better education. And so with that, she's going to tell us now a little about all this. And I will say that what we'll do is she's going to present for however long she goes. And then at the end of that, we have a Q&A button down at the bottom. At the end of that, Susan has agreed to stick around for a while and have a conversation with whomever would like to stay, and so you can then put your questions in the box. So we'll get back to that after Susan's presentation. So with that, Susan, welcome, and we look forward to this presentation.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. Yes, so as Marcus said, I hold 2 vice provost roles at the university. The one in academic programs really deals with quality assurance processes and governance of new programs, the creation of new programs. I'm not going to be talking about that very much today. I'm going to be focusing on some of the work we're doing in the innovations in undergraduate education space. And that portfolio works at many different levels. We do grant programs for individual faculty who are interested in innovating in their classes. We do a lot with experiential learning, working with a network, the Forum on Experiential Learning across the university. So there's a whole variety of things that office does. But one of the big things we do, and the one that I thought would appeal and be of interest particularly to this audience in engineering, is around building the ecosystem to support student academic success. And so what does that mean? When I was tasked with reimagining undergraduate education, one of the things that quickly became apparent is that reimagining is going to require reimagining our data systems and our teaching technology systems. At the university, we are data rich, but very much information incomplete. And many of our processes were manual and outdated, and I would venture to say some still are. So I'm going to give you one example of this. 5 years ago, if you were a professor in arts and science and you were preparing your final exam, you would be emailing your final exam to your department. And we know how secure email is. So you would email it to your department. Your department would manually log either on an Excel spreadsheet or perhaps even just on a piece of paper that you had submitted your exam. They would proofread your exam, which is not normal in engineering, but in arts and science, they proofread exams to check to make sure all the pages are there and there's no major typos and the information is correct. And if they found something that was off, they would email you back and you would email your exam in again. And then it would all be sent to the print shop where the exam would be printed. A printed copy of your exam, if you had a student who had an accessibility need, that printed copy of the exam would be put in an envelope, walked over to Accessibility Services. Accessibility Services would be emailing you to ask you for information about the delivery of the exam. Is it open book, closed book, all of those sorts of, all of that kind of information. And so then Accessibility Services might actually scan your paper exam back into an electronic file to use for, say, a screen reader. And at the end of the exam period, coming up at the end of April every year, or at the end of in mid-December, a stack of one of every exam administered in arts and science, and that would have been several thousand exams, would get carted over to the library where somebody would chop the staples off the corners of each of those and scan them into electronic files to archive in the library. And this was going on every semester. And this was the way exams were administered. And if you had more than one student who had an accessibility need, you might be receiving several emails from test services and accommodations asking you for information for each one of those students about the administration of the same exam that had the same rules and the same kind of information. We saw a need here for creating a system that was going to allow for authoritative information to get into the system once and go where it needed to go. And we saw this kind of manual process being duplicated across the institution in many, many different scenarios. And so we embarked early on in my tenure in this particular job to think about the student ecosystem and what ways we could acquire and utilize data, transfer information in a way that made things make more sense, that defragmented the system, and that brought information together in order to inform and support student success. And also how we could be using technology to enable teaching more effectively. And so this is there's a set of 5 projects that we have going on right now in my office, and the last one being my own personal research. And so I'm going to talk to you about these 5 projects today. I'm going to spend most of my time on the first project, the course information system, which is the most mature of these systems, and on the last one, which is my own personal research. So let me talk a bit about the course information system. The course information system was designed to handle this particular problem that administrative systems designed to enable faculty to administer their courses were essentially manual or analog at the time when, 5-6 years ago. So the course information system is a faculty and staff facing system that's meant to bring all of the data that or information that a faculty member needs to teach a course together for the faculty member, and then allow them to handle the administrative processes that they need to handle to effectively teach the course, and do it once. They enter information once, and then that information goes where it needs to go. So if they upload their final exam in a secure way into this system, then that final exam goes to the print shop, it goes to their department. There's a dashboard at the department that allows the departmental administrator to see that the exam has been booked in, and it goes to test and exam services for students who have accessibility needs. And all of that happens in a secure environment, rather than having lots and lots of emails going back and forth, for example. It also enables the development of syllabi, and the syllabus system is the newest module that we're deploying in the CIS. Exams is now a fairly mature system, but the syllabi system or syllabus system brings together all of that kind of information that a faculty member needs to put together a syllabus. It essentially creates a skeletal syllabus with the required information on it for the faculty member to fill in other information. And then that information that's on the syllabus can go where it needs to go. And that means that the syllabus, or for example, the assessment plan that the instructor has in mind automatically gets checked against divisional rules. If the instructor puts a term work, a deadline outside of the session dates, they put something due on December 27th, this system will flag that. It will ask them if they really meant to have that, that final paper in the course due on the 27th. It won't prevent them from doing it, but it will also give them information about if they really do want to do that, how to get permission, for example, to set a term work deadline outside of session dates and so on. In some divisions, syllabi used to be proofread for all of this information by administrators. The system automatically has those divisional rules built in and does the check in real time when the faculty member is creating the syllabus. It also means that if divisional rules change, those divisional rule changes can be pushed out in real time for the next term as new syllabi are created. And so I'll show you a couple of screenshots of what this looks like. So when the instructor goes in, this is really a snout to tail way of managing the administration of a course. When the instructor goes into the system pushes to that instructor all kinds of information, like what date do classes begin? What is the last drop? What is the drop date or last day to drop classes? When is Thanksgiving? When is Labor Day? When is reading week? All of that information comes together here. Normally, to create a syllabus, the instructor would have to go to about 3 or 4 different websites. They'd have to go and look under the registrar's website for session dates. They'd need to go to the timetable to find out what room they're booked in, what times their lectures or tutorials are at. They may have to go someplace else to find things like language about plagiarism to put on their syllabus. This brings all of that together and puts it in front of the instructor. And particularly for, say, a sessional or a new instructor who is teaching for the first time, it indicates to them what kind of information would be useful for them to have as they're planning out their term. I'll show you another screenshot of this that is particularly, I think, helpful for faculty. We get a lot of very positive comments about this particular aspect of the Syllabus Builder. This has a list of all of the types of statements that you might want to put on your syllabus. So many syllabi, you will probably know, have information about makeup quizzes or academic integrity. They may have a statement about mental health and accommodations. They may have a statement such as the university land acknowledgement on them. This has a list of statements. There's about 22 different categories of statements that we identified when we were designing this system that faculty indicated they want to be able to put on their syllabus. So this allows them to either access university vetted language that they can just check the box and put on the sort of university language or divisional language about, for example, the university's land acknowledgement. Or they can take that language and personalize it. They can make up their own or adjust the language, modify it, and save that language in this system. And so the next semester, when they go to do their next syllabus, that personalized statement is available to them to pop onto their syllabus. So this basically is a way for the university to help faculty put kinds of statements onto their syllabus that may be helpful and supportive for students. And it also, I think, for faculty, removes some of the anxiety about, am I using the right statement about mental health and well-being or harassment and discrimination? If the university changes or the division changes any of the language, this change immediately shows up inside CIS. So the faculty member can use the latest version of the statement. And for the next year, they've got their own personalized statements stored and ready to use. So this is the kind of information that the course information system allows to be pulled together by a faculty member, both for their exams and for syllabi and for a variety of other purposes that are necessary for planning out and administering a course. So I wanted to talk very briefly about how we do the design for this. I teach engineering design in first year for first year engineers. And so we follow many of the principles that we teach in class in engineering design in the design of these types of systems. We work very closely with EASY, which is the Enterprise Solutions Unit at the university, for doing the technical builds on these projects. Some of these projects are built in-house. Some of them are custom off-the-shelf builds. But all of them start with a huge amount of consultation. So we pull together subject matter experts for the CIS. Those subject matter experts include registrars, faculty members, administrators, and we have a functional user group, the FUG, for each project, who takes user stories from the subject matter experts, prioritizes them, figures out which ones are going to be highest value, most feasible. We deploy those using approaches such as a minimum viable product, deploy it rapidly into a few departments to test functionality and use, and then expand across divisions. Each of these builds, like the CIS, requires a certain amount of customization to each division because each division has different business processes, rules, and so on associated with it. And for example, for a faculty member who may be teaching across two different divisions, they will see two different sets of session dates, two different sets of assessment rules, two different, perhaps even, the reading week or the exam period will be different in those two different divisions. So for each of their courses, the divisional rules, session dates, and so on will be customized so that they are operating across divisional boundaries seamlessly. So that's one of our projects, and we think that the CIS has not only opportunities for supporting testing, final exams in particular, but also potentially midterm exams, and for syllabus creation. But ultimately, we want to plug this into Quercus, which is our learning management system, to provide instructors with things like augmented class lists. So instead of just getting a list of students in your class, you could also get an overlapping set of calendars. You wouldn't see which student has which calendar, but it would tell you perhaps when would be the best time to schedule a review session, or when would be the best time to have your office hours. By bringing that data in for faculty by consolidating it from across systems at the university like ROSI, which is our current student information system. It also will enable things like enhanced transcripts for students. So right now, a transcript, you will probably know, has the course title, the course code, and very little other information about the course, and of course the student's grade. Enhanced transcripts, which are now becoming more the norm across other institutions, would include information about the course itself. So you could click through the title of the course in the transcript to get things like the course description. And that course description would be accurate for the time when the student took the course. So if it had evolved since then, it actually captures what the course description looked like at the year the student took it. But one can imagine that it also might include other information about the course, such as the nature of the assessments in the course. Did the course have an experiential learning component associated with it, and so forth, so that students could support their claims of mastery or experience by pointing at an augmented transcript. And finally, for things like government reporting, we're required by the government of Ontario, for example, to report on how many of our graduating students have had one or more experiential learning opportunities. Right now, we have very limited data on that. We know a lot do, but we're only able to report on the fraction that are registered into courses that are, for example, like PEY effectively. And we would like to be able to report on the types of experiential learning that our students are getting in their other coursework. And this will allow us to collect that information for reporting purposes as well. So I'm going to go quickly through a couple more of the sort of special projects that we're working on right now, and then I'm going to talk about my research. So one of the data projects that we have going on is called the Sas Project, the Student Academic Success Project. And it's built around dashboards that show student progress. This came out of, in engineering as vice dean, I would regularly request special data sets from the registrar's office to help me better understand how the rules and regulations that we have impact student academic progression. And based on some of that data in engineering, we changed rules. For example, we made it a little bit harder for students to go on to second year who had failed a number of courses in first year. And the reason we did that and insisted that students go back and retake first year if they had an average below a certain level and had failed a certain number of courses was because we had data that showed that if students went on to second year without having sort of gone back and done a redo, they had virtually no possibility of graduating. We were letting them go ahead, but it was never going to lead to graduation based on the data once you had a look at it. But getting that data was difficult, and you could only do it cohort by cohort off the side of somebody's desk And across the institution, that was true. You couldn't quickly get real-time data on how our students were doing in terms of retention and graduation. So the Sas project is meant to address that. It is a set of data dashboards that allow for support academic decision-making and strategic enrollment management processes. And here's an example of the kind of one of the dashboards that is available now through the Sas project. This one happens to show the pathway of students in the 2015-2016 fall cohort and where they end up 6 years later. Blue means they've graduated, orange means that they've left, and gray means that they are still active. And when you show this to people, they're surprised because you can see in this diagram, for example, that a minority of our students graduate after 4 years. Only about, 30-something% graduate after 4 years. Part of that is because of the increased number of experiential learning opportunities we now have, like PEY, where the vast majority of our students are doing a PEY type program, at least in engineering anyway. And so many graduate by year 5. But it's still only 60-something% that graduate at the end of year 5 and 77% by the end of year 6. And those numbers are much higher in engineering, but it's still surprising, I think, to people that we don't have an even higher graduation rate. And so this type of dashboard allows us to interrogate why is that true and who is struggling. And so if you break this data down further, you actually can see division by division and even down to program by program at this point, what's going on and which students are having the sort of the hardest time making it through our system. Interestingly, what the data demonstrates at the moment anyway, is that domestic male students are not as successful in graduation rates anyway, compared to other groups of students. And we can look at other dashboards within SAS that give you more information about things like admission to student admission to subject posts. This is less of a concern in engineering, where students come into a subject post like chemical engineering and stay typically mostly in chemical engineering all the way through to graduation, or mechanical and industrial. But in arts and science, when they come into arts and science, they then apply to get into a subject post, some of which have no admission criteria, and some of which actually you have to do well in a certain set of classes or have a certain average to get into the subject post. And so this tells us information about how many students are applying to subject posts, what's the yield into the subject post. It gives the divisions information about where they might put faculty lines or resources, where is there a growing demand. So SAS now has a degree level and information, course progression, subject program admissions information in dashboards. And we're working currently on subject program retention to help understand whether the curriculum as designed is supporting student success, or if there are certain if there are bottlenecks in the curriculum design that are creating a undue failure rate or lack of progress in a particular program of study. The Learning Analytics Initiative, which just got going last year, starting with a strategy paper that we wrote last spring, is instructor facing. And so this leverages data from Quercus, so again, our learning management system, to inform instructors about how their students are doing in their individual classes. And ultimately, we'll be able to marry data from different classes together to get again, a better picture of the ways in which our students are accessing and utilizing online learning resources. And so this is just getting going, and we're in the process right now of building what's called the Quercus record store, which will ingest the data from students as they are clicking around in courses, watching videos, interacting with the learning management system, and any other systems that are plugged into Quercus, and then provide that information back to the instructor as dashboards and tools to help them understand the ways in which their students are interacting with their online learning resources. So this is an initial dashboard prototype that we built to give a sense of what this might look like once we have this deployed. Along the bottom is the types of modules that, or videos and other things that an instructor has posted on their Quercus website. And the calendar in the middle shows the instructor when their students are accessing the website most frequently. And so you can see in this particular instance, students are utilizing the website largely or most substantially on Tuesdays. So if you wanted to post something for these students and you wanted them to look at it right away, don't post it Wednesday morning. It's the sort of the conclusion from this data. You would actually want to post it probably Monday morning. Because most of your students are looking at your website on Monday and Tuesday. And then you can also see that many of them are looking at it at night or late in the afternoon. So not so much in the morning, which perhaps is not a surprise for our demographic. Ultimately, there will be a set of these dashboards. We want to make them as simple to use as possible for instructors to get a sense of how their students are utilizing this learning material and resources, but also give instructors ways of setting up easy early warning systems for students who may be lagging or may not be accessing information quite as readily as others, and helping us find smarter ways to support students. And the last initiative, which is very new, is the Student Advising Initiative. This one is actually mirrors to some degree a system that we already have in engineering around student advising. It was in-house, built in-house to help the registrar's office and departmental advisors share notes and information so that if the student goes to the registrar's office or whether they go to the departmental office, everybody's on the same page. And the student doesn't have to repeat all of their information over and over again and get bounced back and forth between offices. In many places at the university, however, that is not the case. They don't have a student advising system set up, either in-house built or of any kind. And so notes are still taken on paper, and they still reside with individual advisors. But our advising ecosystem has become much more rich. We have the registrar's offices, of course, but we also have learning strategists at the university level for students to go to. The student may be seeking financial advice. The student may be going to their department for information or for advising. And all of these puzzle pieces are at the moment disconnected. So if they have gone to the registrar to explain their financial system to the registrar, and the registrar takes those notes, those don't necessarily get communicated to the financial advisor. So when the student goes to see the financial advisor, they have to repeat the situation to the financial advisor. And all of these advisors are having to, again, pull transcripts from Rosie, pull other information from other places. It's a matter of that manual hunting and gathering of information about the student. So the student advising system, which is a custom off-the-shelf product from Salesforce that we are working on right at the moment, will create advisor dashboards with shared note-taking systems and a shared booking system. So when you meet with the student, you can see whether they already have a meeting booked with a financial advisor, for example. You can see if they've already had a meeting with their a learning strategist. So you're not telling them to go do things that they've already done. And you can see what's coming up for them. It also brings things like their transcript and other information in front of you as their advisor to help you communicate with them about what their options are and where they're at currently. And the last thing I will talk about is technology-enabled classrooms. So all of this information and data analysis is all to support learning and student progression. And that takes place in our classrooms. That learning to a large degree takes place in classrooms. The Learning Analytics Project will help us understand the way students are interacting with learning materials and resources online. Our technology-enabled classrooms enable us to, we hope, have that sort of seamless interaction between the technology, the instructor, and the students in class. And pictured below or on the slide are a couple of the classrooms in Myhal that have this technology-enabled active learning environment set up for students and for instructors. So the work that I'm doing in one of my research projects at the moment with Alison Van Beek, and we have a work study student, Ifla Shahid, who's working with us, is to research or to study how instructors interact with this technology in the classroom in order to design future active learning classrooms in ways that implement technology that works for instructors and works for students. And so we're studying current learning spaces and the way in which current learning spaces and technologies are utilized to understand and inform the design of future spaces. And in this study, we're taking an activity theory approach to understanding what we're observing in the classroom. And in activity theory, the concept is in a very basic form that there are subjects, faculty members and students in the classroom. These are actors in the classroom. There's also a set of rules around how they are interacting. And we don't mean rules like don't do this, don't do that. It's more like norms of practice within that and the ways in which the faculty members are designing their classes to operate. And then there is the room itself and the technology in the room, which all act as mediating artifacts in this. You can almost think of it as a kind of a theater where we have actors who are enabling or acting out a script. And the script is the lesson plan that the faculty members are enabling. And we're looking at how do these things work together, or when, and particularly, when do they not work? When do we have a breakdown? And it doesn't necessarily mean that the technology stops working. It's when does the faculty member stop using a technology or revert to something different than utilizing a technology because it's not working for them or it's not working for their students. So Alison both observed in person a whole lot of classes going on in Myhal 150 in the winter of 2020 before the pandemic hit. And then we also had lecture captured captured lectures going on in those rooms. And lectures is kind of in quotation marks because these are very active classrooms where the students are very engaged in activities in the classroom. It's not just people, the instructors lecturing. And we coded that, that interaction. So in particular, we were looking for adaptations of the activities to the limitations and affordances of the classroom and adaptations of the instructor's activities to the organizational norms and expectations that are built into the design of a class at the University of Toronto. And most of the classes she observed were in engineering. So she uses a coding system called the TDOP, which is the Teaching Dimensions Observation Protocol. And she developed a variation on TDOP using what's called the ALCOT, which is the Active Learning Classroom Observation Tool, to enable her to code a wide and rich variety of information about what was going on in the classroom. And so this included types of activities like regrouping, small group work, and included the use and type of tools that instructors are using. She even recorded, like, where is the instructor standing during the classroom? When are they moving in class? When are they standing still? What is their relationship to students in terms of where they are relative to their students? All of this gets recorded into a big data set, and then we break it down for analysis. And the most recent analysis we did on this big data set was with respect to a course that is, it's a calculus course. I don't know what course it is because I don't have a need to know, but it's a calculus course that has 2 sections and 4 instructors. And so interestingly, these are 4 instructors who are all delivering the same material, and in fact the same lessons, largely using the same types of teaching strategies. And what we can see in the data is the different ways in which they utilize the technology in the room to effectively do the same or teach the same thing. And so we, Allison and Ifla have coded the names of the instructors. So we are using colors for coding. So we have banana, flamingo, lemon, and salmon, who are the 4 instructors. And this is the kind of graphic that we can get out of this data set. And so, for example, what this graph tells me is that all of the instructors are using a classroom response system, but almost none of the instructors are using the microphones that are on the students' tables in Myhal. That tells me that there's a technology breakdown there. The microphones are a problem. And in fact, Allison did pre and post interviews with these instructors, and we know from the pre and post interviews that the student microphones simply do not have a high enough sound quality or reliable enough for instructors to trust them enough to utilize. They do work, they just don't work well enough, is what our data is telling us. Interestingly, 3 out of the 4 instructors in this particular case use tablets to notate on, but one of them uses a much more sort of analog technology. They use a doc cam in place of a tablet. That's really interesting from a design perspective because it suggests that having multiple types of technology in a classroom that do this, can enable the same kind of thing, is actually worthwhile because different instructors will gravitate to those different types of technology for doing the same thing, but it makes for a more flexible learning teaching space for instructors. So this is the type of information that's going to help us design future active learning spaces that work effectively for all kinds of instructors. we're at a pivotal moment in the development of institutional process management systems and data systems in North America. Very few universities have fully fledged, well-developed data and process management systems that support student progression. At this point in time, there are good examples like the University of Maryland has a great student advising system. Georgia State has a really good way of doing predictions about student success from their data systems. But very few universities across the board have a fully fledged ecosystem in this area. And certainly in terms of things like active learning classrooms, we're still learning what makes for a good active learning classroom. So we have an opportunity here to be a leader in this area in North America, certainly. There's some very interesting things in being done in Australia, particularly with data systems, I will say. We're looking at the implementation of our 4 data and process management systems over the next 4 years. My term ends in 2025, so I'm hoping that many of these will be, if not fully deployed, well on their way to being by the time I'm done with my current term. And we are in the process of wrapping up our Myhal 150 study that will come out with a set of both a PhD for Allison, I hope, and a set of recommendations around the design of technology-enabled active learning spaces, particularly for large classrooms. In the longer term, I know that we have on the books a whole set of plans for increasing the number of active learning spaces across our 3 campuses. And so we're hungry for information about what technology to put into those spaces and how to make it work. And the architecture of this ecosystem, starting with Rosie and building out to NGSIS, which is the next generation student information system, which now has close to 100 components associated with it, is getting quite complicated. And so I think one of the next big steps that we will be taking is to look at the architecture of that whole system to better understand how we sunset older pieces of it and start to build out a comprehensive and deeply connected system that allows for data to more easily migrate from where it is the authoritative source of that information to where it can be utilized effectively to support student success. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to open it up for questions or discussion.
Well, Susan, thank you. That was terrific, and I think it's looking at the list of participants, I'm tempted to say I think most of us are from here, from the U of T, and I think a lot of us learned something about what's going on. So are you able to see the Q&A, Susan?
I will open it up right now.
All right, because there are questions there, and others are
yes.
welcome to add them, but rather than me get in the way of you answering them, I'll just let you kind of take them on.
Sure. So the first one has to do with admission criteria, and do we relate this back to admission criteria? Yeah, I think anybody in a registrar's office will tell you, and particularly engineering has been quite good at this, I would say. So they regularly look at, for example, each of the courses in high school that are required courses, and then look at the students, how they did in that course, and then how the student or cohort of students did in their engineering programs, to see which of the high school courses is the biggest predictor of success in our engineering programs. It was, in fact, the reason why, and I'm trying to remember what exactly the course title was. We changed one of the high school courses from a you can submit this grade if you want to you must submit this grade as part of your admission process, because we found that it had such a high correlation with success in engineering. And so strategic enrollment management, which is a thing at the University of Toronto, is constantly looking at different kinds of schools, like IB schools versus non-IB schools, or different courses in high school and how it relates to success in different majors in the university, to understand how what we should be asking for in terms of information from students and how we should be viewing that information. And they will also look at, for example, grades across different provinces. We know, for example, and I don't know if this is still true, but it certainly was 5 years ago or 6 years ago, that math grades from Alberta were a bit low compared to how the students actually did when they got here. And so, you know, a B in Alberta is actually kind of like an A- in Ontario. You could kind of do that kind of correlation. So that's that kind of information. I think strategic enrollment and management was actually well ahead of the rest of the university in terms of use of data. There's a number of instructors who have asked that we not be assigned to teal rooms. How are you incorporating these voices into whether more classrooms should be converted into teal classrooms? So we do listen to those voices. I'm not actually in charge of whether we convert classrooms to teal classrooms or not, but divisions are doing this quite actively. So the deans of divisions are doing it. I think the biggest growth in active learning classrooms is at Scarborough, because UT Scarborough, they're having difficulty with demand for their teal classrooms currently. And so they're building a building that has a great deal more teal classrooms built into them. So it's built largely around the ways in which faculty are requesting or not requesting those rooms, and what kinds of rooms they're requesting, what kind of facilities. At Scarborough and UTM, interestingly, and this is something I didn't learn till after I took this job, they have a much tighter set of communication between their instructors and the people who are booking classrooms or creating classrooms, as you might imagine, because they're small, it's like a smaller institution. And so they respond to that demand much more sort of directly. For St. George, of course, our requests go through the LSM, Learning Space Management, and then get fed up to the campus planning around what kinds of rooms get converted into teal classrooms and so on. They just went through the renovation of 175 classrooms. It's called the Transforming Instructional Landscape Project on the St. George campus. But much of that had to do with things like upgrading ventilation in those rooms rather than necessarily converting them to teal rooms. But what they are looking at is converting them to bringing in furniture that's more flexible, so that whether you want to teach in a traditional manner or whether you want to use it in a more active manner, you've got choices in the room. And so flexible learning is becoming a much more common way to design classrooms. So I think the comment from Linda is more of a comment than a question. I'm not seeing a question in there, Linda, but thank you. You mentioned about male domestic students having the lowest graduation rates. Have you explored the reason behind this? Yeah, this is an interesting one. It actually follows the trend. It's not just at U of T, it's actually across North America. Other institutions are observing the same thing. Students domestic male students are, first of all, coming into higher education at lower rates than women. And so we see except for in engineering being the exception, but in virtually every other field, the number of women coming into university is a higher percentage than men. And then women are graduating at even higher rates than men. And so we have a leaky pipeline in the university when it comes to domestic male students. There's been much discussion across institutions about why this is the case. It is not the case in engineering, I will say. Engineering is one of the exceptional divisions where men are doing very well in terms of graduation rates. But it isn't exactly clear what it is both at the high school level and then at the university level in other fields that is why this is resulting. But interestingly, we don't see it for international. The same trend does not hold in international students. International students have a higher graduation rate than domestic students in general.
Can I, Susan, can I just jump in? I just want to acknowledge that it's, I think we're just at 1 o'clock. So just to all of you who are here, first of all, thank you for joining us. And I do want to thank Susan for coming, but most importantly, perhaps I want to say that Susan does have some time past 1, as do I. And so for those of you who have asked questions and those of you who want to hang around, Susan will be continuing to go through that list that, that you've posted. So back to you.
Thanks. So Jeff, hi Jeff, how would you separate whether a technology is being used because it is not useful versus that specific that proves specific use of the technology having barriers? Yeah, this is, you don't know, right? But we did carry out interviews, or my graduate student carried out interviews with the faculty members before the semester started and then afterwards. And before it started, it was about what their intentions were around the use of the technology, what they were thinking when they made use of it. And then after the term, like what worked and what didn't for them. I think, for example, you know, the student microphones, the microphones on the tables is one where we saw repeatedly faculty trying to make use of it. They wanted to make use of it. And they talked about that in their interviews, but it just didn't function well enough or reliably enough for them to keep using it. And so that's one where it may well be worth putting student microphones in other large active learning classrooms, but it's got to be a lot better. And if it's not a lot better, it's probably not worth putting in, is kind of the conclusion that we're coming to. Versus, say, things like the classroom response system. Interestingly, in that particular calculus course, they were using a relatively low-tech classroom response system. We see other classes where they're using high-tech classroom response systems, and we're looking at, you know, one of the ways in which we're breaking down the data right now is to look at the different ways that the different strategies around classroom response systems and how they worked or didn't work for people. This particular calculus course, because this was not the only class that we looked at, but this particular class calculus course uses a color card system for classroom response, which is quite low tech, but had never had an outage. It worked very reliably, but it was extremely low tech. Are data available on how students' incoming grades are assessed? If Alberta is sort of upgraded, is that a process that is transparent to the applicants? I wouldn't say we necessarily upgrade Alberta grades, but anybody who's been involved in the admission process knows that we sit down, you know, there's students that are clearly going to be admitted because they just have extremely high grades, plus all kinds of extracurriculars. There's a lot going on. There are students whose applications are probably not going to get them admitted. But in that gray area, there is a lot of work that gets done to assess the record. And that is where understanding a little bit of the nuance, and we always have to do this, especially with international students, because of course they're not at all on the same grading system than our domestic students. You know, what equals what is very complicated, but it does allow us, if we have some indication or some understanding of the data of how students succeed once they get here, we can translate that back to what is the kind of entering profile we are looking for, because we are always admitting to success. In other words, we want to be admitting students who have a good chance of being successful in our programs of study. But it's not formulaic, as far as I know, unless engineering has now taken steps to make it more formulaic. What is the balance between investing in technology in a smaller number of new spaces versus fixing basic issues in larger numbers of existing spaces? Yeah, Blackboard's not working, persistent AV issues, classroom lighting issues. I can only guess that the classroom lighting issues might be from Bain. Interestingly, you know, Bain was designed to be very energy efficient, but did not do, there was not a lot of consultation with instructors when those spaces were designed, and the lighting was terrible. The university actually ended up having to do a huge retrofit in Bain to try and up the lighting. And I would still say that it's not where it should be. One of the other things that they learned from Bain was that faculty like having more than one screen and like being able to show a Blackboard and a screen at the same time. I can't say that we've gotten great at doing that kind of consultation with faculty before building new buildings, but we are certainly pushing in that direction. I am not in charge of building buildings or building new classrooms. And in terms of investment in new classrooms versus existing classrooms, I would say the institution, there is always a tension between the spaces that are divisional spaces and the spaces that are institutional spaces. Not all classrooms are under the institutional umbrella, but those that are, there's a regular assessment of the needs of that space and whether an upgrade is in order, and how we put upgrades into, as I said, we just went through a process of upgrading about 175 classrooms on the St. George campus because of deficiencies. But obviously there are still classrooms that are in need of further upgrades. So it's quite difficult to use teal room flexibly when there is no large screen at the front of the room. Yeah, that's unique, I think, in Myhal. There's a variety of other rooms across the rest of the LSM grouping that do have screens at the front. Myhal does not. Myhal is very much built explicitly for active learning and small group work rather than a central lecture format. And so the thought was when Myhal was built that we have a lot of those other kinds of rooms in the inventory. And so upping the amount of inventory we had around student-centered active learning rooms was a priority when Myhal was built. For academic advising system, will there be an opportunity for this system to pull data from other systems like Quercus dashboards, career centers, co-curricular to better advise students? Yeah, so this is an interesting one. Yes, but when you pull together people's data, in new and unique ways. There is sensitivity around how much data you pull together to advise a student. And so in connection with the development of the student advising system, there's also a governance process going on to upgrade our notices of collection. And to make sure that the data that is coming into the student advising system is really there to support and advise students. It's not just put every piece of data we have about a student into the system. And I'll give you an example of that. When a student goes to register at accessibility services, they carry in with them information about often it's a medical diagnosis of one kind or another, in order to be assessed for an accommodation. There is a very thick firewall between that data about the student's diagnosis and medical situation and all of the rest of our information systems that are student related at the university. And it is built that way on purpose. And so, for example, it might be really helpful to an advisor to know that medical information about the student to help advise them. But that information will not ever be crossing that firewall. What might cross the firewall, and we're talking to accessibility services about this, is there may be information that says this student is registered with accessibility services or this student has this type of accommodation, but that would be a very limited set of information. And so we have to be careful when we're talking about marrying data together, what the sensitivities are around that data, and what should cross those boundaries. It's not just a free-for-all where every piece of data can go everywhere and everybody can see it. So concern about admission transparency for people who come from a poor rural school. Yeah, so if we don't have a lot of data from your school, there is no, you're given the benefit of the doubt, is I think the best way to put it. Effectively, we don't have enough information from any one school. Like, there are very few schools in the world where University of Toronto draws enough students to make any kind of generalization about an individual school. And so we don't do that. It is a much bigger aggregated set of data that goes into any kind of strategic enrollment management decision-making. It would not be about an individual school. I can think of only one case where we had enough students coming from one school where we were able to draw any kind of conclusion. And interestingly, it was a school in Kuala Lumpur, where we had about 60 or 70 students from that one student in school in Kuala Lumpur, all of whom did spectacularly well in our programs of study, to be able to say anything about how students from one individual school do at U of T. And part of it is because even if you get a substantial number of students from one school, they're so spread across all of the different divisions and majors, programs of study, that it's nearly impossible to draw any particular conclusions from that. Are students being consulted regarding the desirability and efficacy of these technologies? Absolutely. So when I say we do lots and lots of consultations with subject matter experts and we have FUGs, students are engaged in those things. And so we do student focus groups. EASY has a student advisory board that it works with, which is the Enterprise Solutions group at University of Toronto. And so students are always part of this process. You mentioned admitting to success and using student academic success data to inform admissions processes. Do we potentially see biasing admissions processes from students that have traditionally been successful? Yeah, I think that's a really good question. We look at trends in data that have to be substantiated over a long period of time. So you're not looking at, one cohort of students or one individual or a small group of students. You're looking at year over year over year over year, students who did poorly in algebra in high school have a very poor outcome in engineering, for example. And so at that point, you want to say, this is a grade we should be looking at consistently in admission to engineering. So there has to be some rational reason why you're looking at an admission criteria. Does that admission process bias? Well, it biases towards people who do well in traditional courses and in traditional school. There are pathways into the university that are specifically built for students who are coming from non-traditional pathways. And the best example of that, I think, is the program at Woodsworth called the Transitional Year Program, which is for students who have not finished high school for one reason or another, or most of them have not finished high school in the normal way, and who have had significant life circumstances that have prevented them from gaining the kind of record that would allow them traditional admission to the University of Toronto. And so the Transitional Year Program supports those students through a year of courses to gain the sort of admissions information that they need, or the information they need in order to demonstrate capability to allow them to transition into University of Toronto. So there are these on-ramps, they're relatively limited, but there is a expectation that in order to be successful at the University of Toronto, you first have to demonstrate you have been successful in a traditional learning environment, such as high school. And we can question whether or not that's always a necessary thing for individuals who may be exceptional in many ways.
And with that, I think we've answered all of everyone's questions. So to all of you still listening, all of you still here, thank you for joining us. I thought this was great. And Susan, thanks very much for taking time out of what I'm sure is a busy schedule to spend an hour and a bit with us. I think we all learned something, and we really appreciate all the work that you do on behalf of all of us here at the U of T. So thank you.
Thanks. It was a pleasure. I get to talk about fun things.
Well, good. All right. Thanks, everybody. We're going to shut this down now.
Bye-bye.
Bye.